In Book 4, chapters 3 and 4 of The Ancient City, Fustel tells us the story of the first wave of revolutions that began to transform the political and religious order of ancient societies. In chapters 1 and 2, he's introduced us to the patricians and the plebeians, two of the major characters in what's to come. In chapter 3, he tells us the story of the first revolutions. The first revolution was the sidelining of the kings and their deprivation of political power by the aristocracy. Students of Bertrand de Jouvenel's On Power will recognize a similar dynamic, the aristocracy against the royal power, that also plays out in his history. What happens in the ancient societies, though, is that royal power is limited to religion alone. The king becomes a priest and no longer a political figure. Political power is consolidated in the hands of the aristocracy, of this council of fathers, of clan and family chieftains. So the end result of this revolution in most of the cities is a hereditary priesthood and or an elective monarchy, elected by the aristocracy from the aristocracy. Following a pattern that he will persist with for much of the rest of the book, Fustel then tells us the specific history, as well as he can reconstruct it, of this revolution at Sparta, at Athens, and at Rome. And I think his story of the fates of the first 7 kings of Rome is quite instructive. He links up the fate of each king with the attitude he took and the sort of policy he took towards the political claims of the aristocracy. In chapter 4, Fustel describes briefly the rule of the aristocratic order that followed on the success of this first revolution. He notes that there's not much recorded history about societies during this time period, but that's because not much happened. The general focus of life and of activity was intensely local. People dealt with their own household, their own small plot of land, and there wasn't much in the way of collective action at the level of the city. During this time period, the king might be considered the first among equals, but his power has been isolated in religion, not so much in politics. I think the most interesting part for me of this chapter is towards the end, where Fustel walks through some evidence from Homer's Odyssey, which he says represents something of the political order of this time period. And he points out that there are a couple of things that might seem more easily explained in light of this theory about the rule of the aristocracy. The first, that when Odysseus returns from exile in disguise, he doesn't expect obedience and loyalty from anyone except his own personal household servants. He doesn't arrive back at Ithaca and announce, I'm the rightful king, everybody owes me a kind of moral and religious bond of loyalty. In fact, he assumes quite the opposite. Second, that Telemachus, in his father's absence, is not given any kind of recognition of political power solely by virtue of his birth. It seems evident that he has to win this power. He has to show himself worthy of it. He specifically has to win the assent and the obedience of the other kings on the island of Ithaca, the suitors and the other people who don't respect him, who don't give him that deference that we would think would be his due if we followed a more modern understanding of royal power proceeding by heredity. Third, many of the suitors in the Odyssey are called kings. Ithaca is a small island, Fustel says, and yet it seems to be full of kings, and these men are called kings in the text. And fourth and last, when these kings are killed, are slaughtered by Odysseus in his hall, their servants back home take up arms against their master's killer, Odysseus. And there's no suggestion from Homer that this is in any way unjust, that this violates some kind of natural order of obedience that they ought to owe to the rightful king of Ithaca. They are avenging the death of their king against a rival king who has slaughtered him unjustly, they think. So for me, that was some evidence that seems to be, as it were, hiding in plain sight in the Odyssey. When I look through the lens of Fustel's theory at these details of the Odyssey, I find myself nodding my head and saying, yeah, that actually makes sense. The king didn't have the kind of royal power that we would associate with being the king. Instead, he was maybe first among equals and could, had the right to speak and perhaps to take a kind of religious precedence in dealing with the gods, but he didn't have what we would think of as the sort of plenary power of the monarchy. So that's my commentary on chapters 3 and 4. The next stage of the book, Fustel is going to describe for us the unfolding of the second revolution. Whereas the first revolutions were conservative in character, because they involved the aristocracy securing and defending its rights against the seeming threat from the royal power, the second revolution is going to be a social transformation. It's going to involve the entry of the plebs into a certain degree of political power. And it's going to begin with a transformation of the idea of the family, which has been the root of this ancient religion that Fustel has been describing since the beginning of the book, this religion of the hearth fire and of ancestor worship. So we'll take a look at that in the coming videos. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.